I'll hand it over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Adam. I'm Matt, I'm an edit.
Hi, Matt.
Thank you, Ian, for asking me to share. Thank you, everyone that does service and everyone that attended the meeting. I've never been recorded before, so that's new, and that adds a whole new layer of anxiety and self-obsession to proceedings. But I'm just going to try and pretend that isn't there and just crack on as normal. Step 2. Whenever I get asked to share on a step, I kind of try and break it down into 2 different sections, and I think about what the step meant to me when I was early and how it applied to my using and getting clean, and then my understanding of it now and how that's kind of evolved as my life has gone on and other things have come up in my life. I started using when I was about 13 years old, and step 2 says that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. There was nothing insane about my desire to use drugs in the beginning, I don't think. It was just a curiosity, and everyone around me was doing the same thing. You know, it was at school, people were experimenting with alcohol and cannabis and that kind of stuff, and I just thought, well, that looks fun. You know, I'd like to try that as well. But very, very quickly, it became an obsession and a compulsion. And up until that point, I didn't realise how much pain I was in internally. But the relief that I felt when I started using substances was just so immense. It felt like I'd been holding my breath underwater my whole life and I'd suddenly come up for air. Like it was just overwhelming relief. And from that day onwards, I just used every day pretty much. And I say it spanned like 1/4 of a century, which is a really long time when I think about it like that. I don't want to talk about my using too much, but it kind of progressed over the years. You know, I smoked weed in my teens, I sniffed coke in my 20s, and I smoked crack and heroin in my 30s. That's it. And by the time I got into my 30s, I was homeless, I was committing crime, I was in and out of prison. All of my relationships had broken down, friends, family. The vast majority of the people in my life didn't want anything to do with me anymore. And I didn't want anything to do with them, truth be told, because they just became barriers to my using. Using was the only thing that mattered to me by the end, and that is definitely insanity. Step 1 talks about powerlessness, and that's what I was lacking. That's what I was lacking until I came into this program and started to get to grips with a power greater than myself. My higher power, or my understanding of a higher power, is a power greater than myself, for sure. But when I say a power or powers greater than myself, it's a lot more extensive than that. You know, there's 101 powers that can assist me or help me or guide me in this life. Basically, what step 2 means to me, in a nutshell, is that the answers, more often than not, are outside of me. They're not in my own head. Because for so long, I just thought that I knew everything and I had all of the answers. And that definitely isn't the case and was never the case. And what I've found in recovery is that if I actually open my mind, open-mindedness is one of the principles associated with step 2. If I open my mind to other ways of thinking and other people's suggestions and try a different way of doing things, then almost inevitably the results are a lot better than when I try and do things on my own. When I got to about 36, 37 years old, I had had enough of the way things were going. I was just going in and out of jail. I was going round and round and round. Things were getting really, really dire. Those ends that it talks about in our literature, jails, institutions and death, like I was jails and institutions and death was the only one left, really. And so I made a decision, an internal decision for myself, that it was time to get off that train before it got to the last stop. So the willingness to get clean, the desire to get clean, that came organically, that came within me. No one else sort of, lots of people had encouraged me to get clean and tried to help me to get clean in the past, I did lots of treatment centres and other bits and pieces, but the bottom line is I never wanted to get clean. And when I finally did, I had the willingness, but it was this program, this fellowship, that gave me the power that I needed to implement that desire, like to make that desire come to life. And you know, when I came to my first meeting with an open mind, I'd had been to meetings before, but I'd never really taken it seriously. But when I came to my first meeting with that in my mind, like, this is it now, I want to get clean. You know, the identification that I found and the knowledge that I gained from sitting and listening and reading the basic text, listening to other people share who thought like me and had used like me, that was life-changing. You know, it was life-changing to suddenly feel like people got me, and that I had, you know, I saw people that had been where I'd been and were now living very different lives, and I thought, you know, if they can do it, maybe I can do it. You know, introduction to spiritual principles and steps, and beginning to form a relationship with a God of my understanding, sponsorship, connections, you know, fellowship outside of meetings, all of those things combined just gave me the power and the support that I needed to get clean. But, you know, I've been in recovery for quite a long time now. I'm sort of 3.5 years almost. And thank you. And it's almost like I can't dismiss my using. You know, it was a big part of my life and it went on for a very long time, but I always liken it to like driving away from the scene of an accident and looking in the rearview mirror. And it's got to the point now where if I look in the rearview mirror, I can barely see my using. A lot's happened in the last 3.5 years, and my identity today is not about, you know, in my first year or so of recovery, I was an addict in recovery, and that's all I was. You know, I'd go around shouting it from the rooftops, you know, I'm clean, I'm this, I'm that. But now my life has become, I am an addict in recovery, and I always will be, but I've also a lot of other things today. And as I've grown and progressed, the meaning of step 2, as well as all the other steps, has began to apply to a lot of different things in my life. Got a few examples, you know, like one of the first things that kind of came up for me was my health, you know, managing my own health. And when I was in my using, and probably even before my using, I was very reluctant to ever go to the doctor or ever sort of seek any outside help. You know, I just used to get an illness or an ailment of some kind and just think, I'll deal with that. You know, that'll go away on its own. I'll just sort of plod along and figure out the answers for myself. You know, today, if I have a problem, you know, I'll do something about it. I'll go and see the doctor, and I'll seek a power greater than myself to help me. You know, if I had a legal problem or financial problems, you know, I'd go and see a solicitor, or I'd go and see a financial advisor, or I'd accept from the get-go, like, I haven't got all the answers and I need to go and see someone or speak to someone who knows more about this than I do. Money. You know, when I was using, I used to steal. I used to commit a lot of crime. I used to steal a lot of things. And I remember when I first came into recovery, the idea of spending money was alien to me. I was used to taking things and then going to sell them and getting money for those things. So when I went into the shop, like paying for a packet of chewing gum was painful. You know, I thought, why am I paying for things? And I just couldn't get my head around it. And I didn't have any money. So I was kind of really insecure about where the next bit of money was going to come from and whether I was going to be able to afford to live like a legitimate life, pay bills and all that kind of thing. But, you know, through working with a sponsor and through living this program and living through the experience of the last few years, you know, I've learned to have more faith around that stuff. You know, I'll be all right. I'll always get, you know, what is needed will always come from somewhere if I do the next right thing. I remember I went on a trip to New York with my sponsor in I think it was like my second year in recovery, and it felt to me like I was going to the moon. I'd been on holiday before, but I'd never been to the States, and I'd never sort of gone across the Atlantic on a plane, and I was full of fear. And I might as well have been sitting on on the launch pad, just about to go up in a rocket. And I was terrified that I wasn't going to be able to get into the States because of my criminal record. And I thought I was like Pablo Escobar or something. Really, it was just a few shoplifting charges. And I just had this like really unrealistic, overinflated idea of what was happening. And again, you know, my sponsor said to me, right, okay, calm down, let's do this ESTA application. And it was just nothing like what I thought it was going to be. And I went, you know, I had to find a bit of courage to go, but I went and I got in and I had a really good time and I had enough money. And, you know, so they're just kind of examples of how, like, things that I didn't have the courage or the understanding to do until I came into recovery, until I opened my mind up to someone else's ideas and someone else's suggestions. It says in step one of the questions in step one is, are we willing to follow our sponsor's suggestions? And my answer to that was yes, like without a doubt. Whether I agree with it or not is not the point. Usually if I don't agree with it, then I need to follow it even more so. And when I was using, towards the end of my using, my mum passed away. And I wasn't there when my mum passed away. I was in active addiction. And she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's at 50 years old. So she was quite young. It was early onset dementia. And she was very ill. I was very ill. And my dad basically turned around. At the time, I was like a stay-at-home cokehead. And I was driving my dad nuts, you know, borrowing money, robbing things, doing this, doing that. And he basically turned around and said, like, enough's enough, you've got to go. You know, you've got to leave. I can't deal with looking after your mum and putting up with your shit at the same time. And so that was kind of the point when I left home and became homeless and started using harder drugs and doing different things. So I was absent for a lot of my mum's illness. And when she passed away, I remember I was in Birmingham at the time and I was still committing crime and I was still using drugs. And my sister called me and she said, you know, it's getting close, it's going to happen. And I had the opportunity to get on a train. No one would ever give me money. You know, I was always begging my family for money, but they never would. But in this instance, I was offered the money to get on the train and go home so that I could be there for her passing away. And I chose not to do that. And I still don't understand to this day why I did that. I think it might have been fear, avoidance, shame, or maybe I just wanted to stay put and use, you know, or maybe a combination of more than one of those things. But, you know, I regret that. I regret that to this day. And that also was a massive insanity. You know, that was insane. Not being able to love, like not being able to love other people and not being able to let other people love me. Like in this, you know, we're human beings, we're social animals. Love is a very important part of life and being a human being, and I'd kind of lost the ability to do that and receive that, especially when it came to other men, you know, like even my dad, my friends. You know, I'd never told a man that I loved him or been told by another man that they loved me, and that was another thing that I learned in recovery. You know, the people that I built connections with and got to know in recovery showed me love, showed me unconditional love, and eventually started to say it. You know, my sponsor was the first man to ever say, you know, I love you. And I'm able to say that back. I think it was November. It was November last year that I celebrated my 3 years clean, and I also celebrated my 40th birthday. And I had a little party, and there's someone in this room that was there. And it was about a week. There were lots of people there from recovery, lots of support. You know, I was very lucky to get, when I came into recovery, a lot of the family members and friends that I kind of lost touch with, or relationships that had broken down in addiction, all of that stuff came back quite quickly for me. I was really lucky in that respect. You know, when I sort of started to sort myself out through work in this program, a lot of my relationships began to repair very quickly, and I'm very grateful for that. But I celebrated my 40th birthday and my dad was there. And I think it was about a week after that, he started to fall over. And it's worth mentioning as well, I didn't actually see or speak to my dad for about eight or 9 years after he kicked me out. Like during that time when my mum passed away, thank you, acknowledged. He started falling over about a week after the party. And my sister and I took him to A&E, and he was admitted to hospital that night. And he didn't come out of hospital for 10 and a half weeks. And whilst he was in there, they did all sorts of tests and scans, and it turned out that he had cancer, and that it was quite extensive. And basically, just after Christmas, they sent him home and said, basically, there's nothing we can do for you. You know, it's too advanced. He'd probably had it for a long time without realising. And they said that he was too frail to undergo any kind of treatment. And so it was just a case of, you know, go home and make yourself comfortable. You've got a few months to live. And I lived at home with my dad at the time. And so I've been quite heavily involved in his care. And he passed away on Wednesday this week, after like a relatively short battle with cancer. And it was very, very difficult to watch. He was in a lot of pain at times. Basically what I'm getting at is I was able to be there for my dad in a way that in recovery, in a way that I couldn't be there for my mum in my using. And I was able to tell my dad that I love him, and I was able to cuddle him, and I was able to comfort him, and do all of the things that addiction had robbed from me. You know, I would not have been able to do any of that. I probably wouldn't have even been around if I'd even been alive, had I still been using. So basically, I was able to be there and love my dad at the end when it really mattered. It wasn't all plain sailing. You know, my dad was at the top of my resentment list, and there was a few rows and a few sort of, when he was sort of getting there was a few bust-ups and a few rows and that. But when it mattered, when he got towards the end, you know, there was a lot of love and a lot of comfort. And he died well. You know, we had all his family around him. And yeah, so what I'm saying is that's a massive restoration to sanity. Like, there's no bigger restoration to sanity than being able to love, give and receive love where that was absent in my active addiction. And my partner was there as well. My partner was there holding my hand when he passed away. And I'm in a relationship, and that relationship is going from strength to strength, even though we've been through a lot of difficult times recently. And that again is an example of me being able to love someone and allowing someone to love me. And that didn't exist when I was using. That didn't exist in my addiction. You know, I couldn't do that. All I could see was me and my self-centered fear and need to use. But yeah, I'm eternally grateful for this program and for the ability that it's given me to like navigate life on life's terms. And I feel held. I feel strong. I feel supported. It is difficult. Like, I'm not going to pretend it's not sad and difficult, but you know, I've got faith that I'll get through it and come out the other side and move on with my life, which I think is what he would have wanted. So yeah, thank you all for listening. I'll leave it there. Cheers.
Thank you very much.